I have a confession to make before I start. I do remember the 60s. That's how old I am. No, I wanted to talk to you today about two words, tragedy and joy. And as someone who uses a wheelchair and is disabled, I am usually associated with the tragedy part. But the thing is that actually disability and joy are not mutually exclusive. And people with disabilities, I just would like to sort of shift the vision a bit. Maybe the next time you look at somebody with a disability, you'll look at a little differently. I happen to think the possibilities are limitless for somebody who's 62 and has multiple sclerosis and is going back to school and studying human rights and social justice and all that stuff as a degree in disability studies. But the point is that there is a disconnect between the way people with disabilities see themselves and the way other people see them. And you may see tragedy, I see opportunity. I see lots of room for great things to happen, and I'd like to sort of talk a bit by telling a few stories this afternoon. And before I start, before I sort of get into the nitty-gritty, I'm going to tell you a story about my days as a journalist. I'm not only remember the 60s, I'm a journalist as well. So, it was when I was working for a daily newspaper, and one of my colleagues, he was a really talented editor. He was originally from South Africa, and he liked to describe himself as a brown person. And at the time, there was a large courier company bombarding everybody with all these television ads. They had, all their couriers wore brown uniforms. And the slogan was, "What can brown do for you today?" So every day I'd walk into work and Kenny would say to me, "Well, Helen, what can brown do for you today?" And I'd say, "I don't know, Kenny, what can white and crippled do for you?" And we thought we were hilarious. I mean, we laughed and laughed and laughed. We went on and on about this. But it was sort of our armor. It was our way of taking ownership over the fact of the difference between the way we saw ourselves and the way other people saw ourselves. So that was our little morning shtick that we used to do. But I want to talk to you today about a few people who really do push boundaries in ways that you wouldn't imagine. I have a slide here of a painting by a young woman. She's 28 now. Her name is Rebecca Biani. And she painted this in a high school art class, just on a piece of brown paper. She liked to paint to music, and she holds the brush. She has cerebral palsy and is in a wheelchair, and she holds the brush between her middle and index finger, and she sort of lets the paint fly across, in this case, a piece of brown paper that her high school art teacher put down. And he looked at the painting and immediately thought of passion, and that became the name for it. And then he lost it. He put it away somewhere and he couldn't find it. And finally he saw a little corner of a crumpled piece of brown paper sticking out one day, and he found the painting, put it in a juried art show where it was seen by the founder and the director of Ryerson School of Disability Studies. And they were looking for something to symbolize the School of Disability Studies. So they took Rebecca's painting, and it became the poster that now does stand for the passion and the vision and the action that is involved in disability studies. Now, Rebecca, who is 28, she doesn't communicate verbally. And cerebral palsy, I should say, just by way of diversion for a minute, cerebral palsy isn't a disease. Cerebral palsy is the result of a brain injury. And it's usually at birth, often because of oxygen deprivation. So it's not everybody thinks, oh, it's a big disease. It isn't a disease. And everybody thinks, oh, everybody who's disabled, their lives are big tragedies. Well, there's a lot of joy in there. And Rebecca does a lot of community work. She has a PowerPoint presentation, and she goes around to various community groups, and she talks about disability and about the possibility. She also is a docent at the museum. She helps take kids around the museum. And she works at a drop-in center. And the drop-in center happens to be next door to a very high-end, high-price bridal boutique. So in the window is all this satin and lace and these big bridal gowns. And the drop-in center and the bridal boutique never had anything to do with each other until Rebecca was giving one of her PowerPoint presentations, and the owner of the bridal boutique happened to be in the audience. So after Rebecca was finished, the owner of the bridal boutique came up and she said, you know, I had no idea what was going on next door and all the programs that you have at the drop-in center. And she said, you know, we have a lot of pieces of material left over when we're making these gowns. We end up with these little bits of satin and little bits of lace. And do you think that the drop-in center could use them anyway? So Rebecca said, yeah, sure, it'd be great. So the satin and the lace were delivered to the drop-in center. And the women at the drop-in center started making tiny little wedding dresses for teddy bears. And the teddy bears and the wedding dresses took off, and they sold them, and it became a whole new thing. And Rebecca did that. And that's sort of what inclusion is all about, and it's what action is all about, and it's what pushing boundaries is all about. Some years ago, I also went to one of the first inclusive kindergartens in Toronto. It was run by Easter Seals, and there were kids in really heavy-duty wheelchairs, and kids with arm crutches, and kids who were just kids. And they all went to kindergarten together. And at the time, I have a big brace on my leg. I was walking with a cane. And I was in my defiant stage. I would wear a skirt, and I'd go around, and this is my disability, deal with it, sort of thing. So I walk into the kindergarten class, and there's about 15 kids there. Nobody stares at my cane. Nobody shrinks from my brace. And afterwards, when I'd been talking to the kids about, you know, the possibilities about growing up and everything, I'm walking along the corridor to the gym where they're going to graduate the next day, and a little boy comes up to me, and he puts his hand in mine, and he looks up at me, and he says, now, if you need anything, you just ask me. I'm your man. So I said, well, that's okay. And I think that's sort of what inclusion was about. I mean, that little boy had no visible disabilities. He's probably by now in his 20s. He may have his own business. When somebody in a wheelchair or an electric scooter comes and applies for a job, he's not going to shrink away. He's not going to have what I have, the you factor. You know, he's going to look at what the person has to offer and whether he or she is good for the job. So it's all in the way you look at it. If we look at disability as a tragedy, if we don't see beyond that, then we're missing out on a whole bunch of stuff. I have one other story to tell you, and it's about a large corporation, a very straight-laced, stiff sort of place. Everybody had their job, everybody did their job in their little cubicles. And the chairman of the company decided that they should be giving back to the community, and one of the ways he thought they should do that was to hire somebody with a disability. So they hired a young man with Down syndrome, and this again is a few years ago, before everything was done by email, and companies actually wrote to each other. So this young man was hired to deliver the mail, and he had his cart, and he was a very personable young man, and he talked to everybody, but he kept getting the mail all wrong. He'd deliver somebody else's mail here and somebody's there. And so all the executive secretaries eventually got really ticked off about this, and they thought, you know, this kid has to go. We can't have this. Everybody gets the wrong mail. And the chairman stood his ground, and he said, no, you have to, the kid isn't going, deal with it, and everything. So the way they started to deal with it was, if the vice president got the president's mail, then the executive assistant for the vice president actually went over and talked to somebody and said, this is the wrong mail. And they all went around delivering the mail themselves. And they found out what happened is, all of a sudden, people got to know each other in that company, and morale improved, and it became a nicer, gentler place to work. And it just changed the whole environment. And that, again, is just an example of what people with disabilities have. There's a lot of joy, there's a lot of stuff there to give. The director of the School of Disability Studies was at an international conference not so long ago, and she had the Rebecca Biani's painting, the Passion painting there as a symbol of the School of Disability Studies. And a Japanese economist came up and said, you know, that's a really, really interesting painting. He said, it reminds me of a Japanese ideogram, the center part of the painting. And he drew the ideogram. And he said that this ideogram means sure. It means certain. It means without fail. And that, again, is what Rebecca had painted. And I'm just going to leave you with one other thought. It's a friend of mine who signs off all her emails with a quote from the performance artist Neil Marcus. And Neil Marcus says, disability is not a brave struggle. It's not courage in the face of adversity. Disability is an art. It's an ingenious way of living. And that's the way to look at it.